In a single tweet, Jasmine Crockett dismounted an entire smear campaign, but the way it happened will leave you stunned. The stage was set on a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning when the news cycle churned endlessly, hungry for a scandal, desperate for drama. Karoline Leavitt knew this. She thrived on it. With her phone in hand and cameras waiting for a spark, she fired the opening shot, an attempt to cancel Jasmine Crockett in front of the nation. Her words hit like a slap, sharp and deliberate. Social feeds lit up instantly, screenshots, hot takes, hashtags flying across timelines. Crockett exposed, one trending headline read. Another declared, Karoline takes down Jasmine. The tone was triumphant, smug, and dripping with the confidence of someone who believed she had landed a final blow. Gasps echoed through the digital hallways of Twitter. Clips spread on Instagram. Commentators leaned forward in their chairs, eager to crown a winner. The smear had all the makings of a viral storm, outrage, mockery, and a clear target. For a moment, it seemed as though Karoline had seized control of the narrative, pulling the spotlight onto her and pushing Jasmine into the shadows. But the silence from Jasmine was deafening. She didn't rush to defend herself. She didn't scramble for allies. Instead, she let the storm rage, let the crowd jeer, let the headlines build. And in that quiet, anticipation swelled. What would she say? Would she retreat? Would she fight back? Every tick of the clock heightened the tension. News anchors speculated. Political pundits sharpened their knives. The internet, always hungry for blood, circled like sharks. The smear campaign was designed to corner Jasmine, to paint her as defensive, weak, outmatched. And then came the shift, not in Karoline's favor, but in Jasmine's. A single notification appeared on timelines everywhere. Jasmine Crockett has tweeted. Just one line, just one message, yet the weight of it was enough to crack the stage beneath Karoline's feet. What Jasmine unleashed in that moment was not a defense, but a masterstroke. It was witty, razor-sharp, and devastating in its precision. And as the words began to spread, something remarkable happened. The gasps turned to laughter. The jeers turned to cheers. The supposed cancellation was about to backfire in spectacular fashion. But no one expected what happened next.
Karoline Leavitt didn't stumble into the spotlight by accident. She engineered it. From the very start, her career was fueled by an iron will to be seen, to be heard, and most of all, to dominate the conversation. In a world where political voices often blur together in cautious sound bites, she was something different. Fiery, unfiltered, and completely uninterested in playing nice. That rawness made her magnetic to some and intolerable to others, a formula for relevance in a country addicted to outrage. Her rise began as a spokesperson, a role that demands precision, loyalty, and a gift for spin. Karoline didn't just spin, she slashed. Reporters quickly learned that asking her a tough question meant inviting a sneer, a quip, or a verbal dagger dressed up as confidence. She built her brand on confrontation, relishing the chance to humiliate her opponents with a smirk and a soundbite that cable news producers could replay endlessly. Online, her presence was even sharper. Karoline wielded Twitter like a sword, slicing through nuance with a few keystrokes. Her followers praised her for telling it like it is, celebrating her audacity in a world that often punishes women for being outspoken. But her critics saw something else, a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and recklessness, wrapped in a polished image designed to mask the cruelty underneath. And that contradiction, the sheen of professionalism versus the sting of her rhetoric, became her calling card. In photos, she was immaculate, poised, well-dressed, the very image of composure. But in her words, she was relentless, reveling in personal attacks, reveling in the chaos she created. It was a duality that made her fascinating to watch and infuriating to endure. She understood the performance of politics in the digital age better than most. Every insult was delivered with calculation, every viral moment crafted for maximum shock value. And she believed deeply that fearlessness was the same as power. But here's what made Karoline especially formidable. She wasn't stupid. Beneath the arrogance was a sharp intellect and a talent for exploiting weaknesses. She studied her opponents, found the soft spots in their armor, and drove her rhetoric like a spear into those vulnerabilities. Her enemies learned quickly. Underestimate her and you would regret it, which is why, when she turned her attention to Jasmine Crockett, the move reverberated instantly. Karoline had chosen her target carefully, or so she thought. Jasmine represented everything Karoline loved to tear down: authenticity, identity, and a refusal to bow to the traditional gatekeepers of power. By going after Jasmine, Karoline wasn't just picking a fight. She was trying to erase a voice that had become a symbol for so many. Her cancellation attempt wasn't a slip of the tongue or a spur-of-the-moment outburst. It was a performance crafted to wound. Karoline believed she had the momentum, the media muscle, and the digital army to crush Jasmine with a single strike. And for a brief moment it looked like it might work. The headlines leaned her way, the trolls echoed her lines, and the internet swelled with the manufactured drama she had unleashed. But arrogance has a way of stretching too far. Karoline's bravado was also her blind spot. She saw herself as untouchable, armored by her sharp tongue and loyal following. She forgot that a sword cuts both ways, and that in the age of instant reaction, one misstep could flip the narrative overnight. Her attack on Jasmine was the boldest move of her career, a gamble to solidify her place as a queen of controversy. If she won, she'd humiliate a rising star and tighten her grip on the spotlight. If she lost, well, in her mind, losing wasn't an option. But she had no idea who she was up against. To understand why this moment mattered so much, you have to see the battlefield it unfolded on. America, in this chapter of its story, was no stranger to division. The political climate pulsed with hostility. Each side convinced the other was tearing the nation apart. Words weren't just words anymore. They were weapons. And in that climate, a single tweet could topple reputations, sway elections, or redefine what people believed about truth itself. Karoline Leavitt had built her name in this very arena. She wasn't just another political voice. She was a provocateur, sharp-tongued and unapologetically combative. For her, confrontation wasn't a risk, it was a brand. Whether on cable news panels, campaign stages, or the echo chambers of social media, she thrived on conflict. Her followers adored her defiance. Her critics loathed her arrogance. And Karoline used both to fuel her rise. So when she aimed her fire at Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't an accident. It was strategic. Jasmine represented something Karoline could never quite control. A voice that refused to be silenced. A presence that embodied resilience and representation in its purest form. For many Americans, Jasmine's very existence in public life was a statement. Proof that the corridors of power could belong to someone who looked like them, spoke like them, and carried the weight of communities too often ignored. That's why Karoline's attack cut deeper than a petty feud. It wasn't just one woman against another. It was voice against silence, representation against erasure, authenticity against performance. Every insult Karoline hurled wasn't just aimed at Jasmine. It rippled outward, echoing through the hearts of those who had ever been dismissed, doubted, or demeaned. And the stakes didn't stop there. In the digital age, no battle stays confined to the people who start it. Social media has a way of turning sparks into infernos. Within minutes, Karoline's call-out was plastered across feeds, hashtags forming like wildfire, threads dissecting every word. For her supporters, it was a rallying cry. For Jasmine's, it was an insult that demanded an answer. The country was watching, and the internet was waiting to explode. Every second Jasmine held back, the tension grew. Would she cave? Would she lash out? Or would she find a way to flip the script entirely? The beauty of politics in this hyperviral world is also its curse. Once a narrative takes hold, it's nearly impossible to pull it back. Karoline believed she had seized that narrative. But here's the thing about overconfidence. It blinds you to the moment the ground begins to shift beneath your feet. As Karoline doubled down, her words grew sharper, her tone more reckless. What had started as a calculated move to score points became something else entirely. A spectacle, a performance of arrogance that was beginning to alienate even some of her own allies. The clash was no longer just another headline. It was about to ignite the internet, not as a story of Jasmine's downfall, but as a testament to what happens when dignity meets arrogance in a world that records every second. And that's when Karoline made her fatal mistake. To understand why Jasmine Crockett's response carried so much force, you have to trace the path that brought her to this moment. Unlike Karoline Leavitt, Jasmine's rise wasn't paved with curated opportunities or well-oiled machines of power. Hers was the story of grit, resilience, and a refusal to compromise her truth, even when the easier choice would have been silence. Born into a working-class family, Jasmine grew up in a world where struggle wasn't theoretical. It was lived reality. She knew what it meant to watch loved ones fight for dignity in a society that often dismissed them. She understood the sting of being underestimated before she ever stepped into the halls of politics. Those experiences, carved deep into her identity, became the foundation for the voice she carried into public life. Before she was ever a congresswoman, Jasmine was an advocate. She fought in courtrooms for those who had no one else to fight for them, clients who were poor, marginalized, written off as statistics. She stood in spaces where power tilted heavily against the voiceless, and she learned that the sharpest weapon wasn't volume, but clarity. Every case, every late night preparing briefs, every heartbreak in the face of injustice etched into her a sense of purpose that no smear campaign could erase. When she entered politics, it wasn't out of a hunger for fame or a thirst for dominance. It was out of necessity. She had watched policies tear at the lives of the people she represented in court. She had witnessed entire communities left behind by leaders too insulated to notice the damage. Running for office was a risk, but it was also a natural extension of who she already was. A fighter, unapologetic and unafraid. And with that leap came both triumphs and scars. Jasmine wasn't welcomed with open arms by the establishment. She was challenged, questioned, sometimes even mocked for daring to speak plainly in rooms where euphemisms were the norm. Yet instead of dimming her fire, those slights hardened her resolve. Every jab at her appearance, her accent, her background became proof of why her voice mattered. It was this authenticity, this refusal to put on a mask, that made Jasmine both a target and an inspiration. For her supporters, she was the embodiment of representation. She was living proof that politics didn't have to belong only to the polished elite. For her detractors, that same authenticity was threatening, a reminder that the old rules could be rewritten. And Jasmine knew it. She carried herself with the awareness that every insult hurled at her wasn't just ABO. It was about every young person watching who wondered if their voice could ever carry weight. It was about every immigrant family, every working-class parent, every community member who needed to see someone unafraid to stand in the storm and still smile. This is what made her uniquely prepared for Karoline's attack. While Karoline relied on spectacle and performance, Jasmine had already lived through storms that cut much deeper than words on a screen. She had battled doubt, systemic bias, and the crushing weight of expectations. She knew how to stand tall in the face of derision because she had been standing tall her entire life. And here was the crucial difference. Karoline wielded her sharp tongue like a weapon, but Jasmine wielded her presence like armor. Where Karoline thrived on belittlement, Jasmine thrived on resilience. Where Karoline shouted to dominate, Jasmine spoke with clarity to dismantle. One woman sought attention, the other sought truth. And in the clash between those two forces, history has a way of favoring the latter. So when Karoline tried to cancel her, Jasmine didn't panic. She didn't flinch. She didn't feel the need to launch into a frantic defense, because she knew something Karoline didn't. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs precision. That precision was her gift. Years of advocacy, years of political battle scars, years of carrying the weight of representation had honed her ability to cut through noise with just a few words. And when the moment came, she didn't need paragraphs. She didn't need a press conference. She didn't even need to raise her voice. So when the insult came, Jasmine needed only one tweet to change everything. Karoline's strike landed like a thunderclap across the digital sky. Her words were sharp, crafted not just to wound Jasmine, but to humiliate her in front of millions. Within minutes, pundits seized the moment. Clips of Karoline's jab flashed across news feeds, commentary flooded cable panels, and trolls swarmed like vultures circling fresh prey. It looked, at least on the surface, like Jasmine Crockett had been cornered. The imbalance was almost cinematic. On one side, Karoline was loud, brash, and seemingly in command of the narrative. Her allies amplified her message with memes and soundbites designed to sting. Headlines tilted in her favor. Leavitt strikes hard. Crockett on defense. Karoline exposes the weakness. It was the familiar script of political combat, where the aggressor often appears to control the stage. On the other side, Jasmine stayed silent. No frantic rebuttal, no flood of defensive posts, no visible reaction at all. For her detractors, that silence was proof of defeat. She has no answer, they taunted. She can't handle the heat. The internet buzzed with the energy of a crowd that smelled blood, convinced it was only a matter of time before Jasmine crumbled under the weight of Karoline's campaign. But silence can be deceptive. Behind the storm, Jasmine was neither rattled nor retreating. She was waiting for the noise to peak, for the insults to overextend, for Karoline to show the arrogance that always lurked just beneath her confidence. It was patience born from years of courtroom battles and political dogfights, a discipline that taught her the value of timing over volume. Still, the digital swarm grew louder. Hashtags mocking Jasmine trended. Talk show hosts chimed in with smirks and sly remarks. Even neutral commentators speculated that this could mark a serious blow to her reputation. The imbalance felt so complete, so one-sided, that casual observers assumed the fight was over before it had even begun. And yet, there was something in the silence that unsettled Karoline. She had expected outrage, a fiery retort, a desperate scramble to claw back ground. Instead, she was met with nothing. That nothingness began to feel heavy, like a storm cloud gathering just beyond the horizon. For all her bravado, even Karoline couldn't quite shake the sense that the silence wasn't weakness. It was calculation. As the frenzy built, Jasmine's supporters also grew restless. They watched the pile-on with clenched fists, their faith steady but their anxiety mounting. They knew Jasmine's strength, but they also understood how quickly narratives could harden in the public mind. One wrong move, one delayed response, and the smear could stick. Yet still, Jasmine gave them nothing. No hint of her strategy, no preview of her next move. Just the kind of stillness that precedes an earthquake. And then came the moment. The crescendo of mockery had reached its height. Karoline had overplayed her hand, doubling down with an arrogance so thick it practically begged for collapse. The trolls had become overconfident, the pundits smug, the crowd certain of victory. That was the opening Jasmine had been waiting for. Without warning, a single notification lit up screens across the country. Jasmine Crockett has tweeted. Just 7 words, yet enough to make millions pause mid-scroll. The silence had broken, and with it came a wave of anticipation that eclipsed everything Karoline had built. And then, with just 280 characters, everything shifted. It was just one tweet. Just 280 characters. Yet in that instant, it felt as if the entire internet stopped to read. Jasmine Crockett didn't waste a single syllable. She didn't rant, she didn't plead, and she didn't sink to Karoline's level. Her words were sharp enough to slice through the noise, witty enough to draw a laugh, factual enough to be irrefutable, and devastating enough to leave her opponent reeling. The tweet read like a masterstroke of timing and precision. A pointed reminder of Karoline's hypocrisy, wrapped in humor, delivered with the calm confidence of someone who knew she was untouchable by cheap theatrics. It wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was cool, direct, and impossible to spin away. For a moment, there was silence. Not because people weren't paying attention, but because they were stunned. The same crowd that had been cheering Karoline's bravado only minutes earlier was suddenly caught off guard. Their laughter choked. Their jeers stalled. And then, like a dam breaking, the reactions flooded in. "Oh, my God." One user tweeted, their post racking up thousands of likes within minutes. Another wrote, "This is how you end a smear. Elegant, savage, untouchable." Screenshots of Jasmine's tweets spread like wildfire, plastered across Instagram stories, stitched into TikToks, dissected in Facebook groups. Memes appeared almost instantly. Jasmine as a queen dropping a royal decree. Jasmine as a swordswoman cutting through Karoline's words with a single swipe. The hashtags began to trend within the hour. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag tweet heard round the world. Hashtag mic drop moment. Each one carried Jasmine's words further, embedding them into the cultural bloodstream. On cable news, anchors who had spent the morning speculating about Jasmine's silence suddenly had a new storyline to chase. Clips of her tweet appeared on screen with bold graphics. Crockett counters with one line. Pundits who had been quick to label Karoline the victor now stumbled over themselves, backpedaling, searching for ways to explain the turn. And the public? They were eating it up. Late-night hosts pounced on the drama. Reading Jasmine's tweet aloud to studio audiences who roared with laughter and applause. Talk show panels marveled at its construction. It's not just what she said, one commentator explained. It's how she said it. Calm, composed, and cutting. That's how you win the internet. Meanwhile, Karoline's camp faltered. At first, her supporters tried to mock the tweet, dismissing it as weak or irrelevant. But their voices cracked under the weight of the overwhelming public reaction. The louder they tried to shout it down, the more ridiculous they sounded. Karoline herself attempted a follow-up, a clumsy retort typed in haste, but it only highlighted the elegance of Jasmine's precision. Where Jasmine's words had been sharp and clean, Karoline's looked defensive, cluttered, and desperate. The contrast was glaring. Jasmine looked like the steady hand, the adult in the room, the leader who could deliver a lesson without breaking a sweat. Karoline looked like the loud kid in class who just realized the teacher wasn't laughing. Imagined visuals swept across timelines. Side-by-side screenshots of Karoline's rambling attempt and Jasmine's one-liner, with captions like, Exhibit A versus Exhibit B. GIFs showed explosions, mic drops, and even boxing knockouts labeled with Jasmine's tweet as the punch. For once, politics felt less like drudgery and more like a blockbuster movie, and Jasmine was the undeniable star. And the reach only grew. Journalists wrote entire articles dissecting the brilliance of the comeback. Social media experts praised the strategy, noting how Jasmine had harnessed silence to build suspense, then delivered the perfect payoff. Academics weighed in on how this moment reflected shifting power dynamics in digital politics. Authenticity beating performance, dignity beating arrogance. But beyond the analysis, there was the raw human reaction. People felt validated. Communities who had seen themselves dismissed or erased saw Jasmine standing tall for them. They shared the tweet not just because it was clever, but because it felt like a victory for every time they had been talked over or belittled. It was more than a clapback. It was representation in action. And for Karoline, it was devastating. Her entire strategy unraveled in real time. The smear that was supposed to define Jasmine ended up defining Karoline. As arrogant, overconfident, and outmatched. The silence Jasmine had held was no longer seen as weakness, but as wisdom. The tweet became the exclamation point on Karoline's downfall, a reminder that sometimes the smartest move is to wait until your opponent has hung themselves with their own rope. The ripple effects were immediate. Donations to Jasmine's campaign spiked. Her follower count skyrocketed overnight. Commentators noted the surge of support from younger voters, who rallied around the moment as proof that authenticity could still win in politics. And as the dust settled, one truth became clear. Jasmine hadn't just defended herself. She had flipped the narrative entirely. What was meant to be her downfall had become her triumph. And all it took was one tweet. But the real shock came in the aftermath.